In the minds of most people, the Second World War is often simplified into a clear confrontation. The Allies, the US and Britain versus the Axis Germany, Italy and Japan. However, history, much like the battlefield itself, is rarely that simple. There are hidden corners where the lines of morality and loyalty were hopelessly tangled, creating moments of tragedy that have often been glossed over. In November 1942, as the war in Europe reached peak ferocity, a massive Anglo-American landing operation took place on the shores of North Africa. It was Operation Torch. The goal was to seize control of Morocco and Algeria from the Vichy French regime, opening a second front and paving the way for an assault on Europe's soft underbelly. But the uncomfortable truth few remember is this. In the initial days of Operation Torch, the American military wasn't fighting the Germans. They were fighting the French. This was a chilling paradox. American G.I.s landed in North Africa carrying the banner of liberation, but they were met with fierce resistance from guns manned by French soldiers, men sworn to the Vichy government, a puppet regime collaborating with Nazi Germany. The Vichy regime, led by Marshal Philippe Pétain, controlled the vast colonies of North Africa. For American commanders, the objective was a friendly invasion, where they expected the French forces to quickly switch sides. The reality was radically different. The context in Morocco and Algeria in 1942 was a messy tangle of divided loyalties. On one side were officers and soldiers who supported Charles de Gaulle's Free France, eager to join the Allies. On the other, the vast majority of the colonial army still obeyed orders from Vichy, fearing reprisal or simply feeling betrayed by their former allies, especially after the British attack on the French fleet at Mers el-Kébir in 1940. Casablanca, the heart of the Moroccan landing, became the most violent flashpoint of this tragic confrontation. Here, American warships had to engage in fierce battles with French naval vessels, and American ground troops tasted blood and death for the first time, not at the hands of a defined enemy, but at the hands of potential allies. The situation raised a shocking and profound question of wartime ethics. When the overriding strategic goal requires the shedding of blood of men who are fundamentally not the enemy, where is the line between liberation and invasion? Hundreds of American and French soldiers were killed in 3 days of confused fighting, not over the principle of anti-fascism, but over a clash of political orders and loyalties. The forgotten truth lies in the agonizing decision faced by the Vichy French officers. They had to choose between orders from a German-backed government or patriotism to an occupied France. This hesitation transformed the beaches of Morocco into a confused and sorrowful battlefield. Today we are reopening the files to find the truth. What really happened? Operation Torch launched on November 8, 1942 with 3 main landing sites: Casablanca in Morocco and Oran and Algiers in Algeria. The force was enormous, over 107,000 Allied troops, mostly American, under the overall command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower. The strategic goal was to relieve pressure on the Soviet Union and eliminate the German-Italian forces already fighting in North Africa. The Vichy French forces in North Africa totaled about 125,000 men. They were well equipped, including Foreign Legion units, colonial troops, and a significant naval fleet highlighted by the battleship Jean Bart at Casablanca. While Vichy officers were often personally hostile to the Nazis, they felt bound by the armistice terms and were deeply resentful over the 1940 Mers el-Kébir incident, where the British Navy attacked and sank part of the French fleet to keep it out of German hands. This fueled a deep-seated anti-British sentiment among Vichy's ranks. American planners fatally misjudged the potential for resistance. Based on secret talks with pro-Allied French senior officers like General Henri Giraud and Admiral François Darlan, they believed the landing would be a formality. But the loyalties of the troops on the ground were not theoretical. They obeyed orders and fought back against what they saw as an unprovoked invasion. At Casablanca, the landings were the most tragic and chaotic. The American forces, commanded by General George S. Patton, faced heavy fire from the moment their landing craft hit the water. The US landings were split across 3 nearby beaches: Fedala and Fedala. At Fedala, the primary staging point landing craft were met with machine gun and artillery fire from French coastal fortifications. A full-scale naval battle erupted as US warships engaged French destroyers and submarines. The fighting peaked with the duel between the American ships and the battleship Jean Bart. The massive French vessel, though previously damaged, was still able to use its 15-inch guns to return fire. One of the most horrifying tactical details was the necessity for American gunners to fire upon French vessels for which they held no malice. The USS Massachusetts and USS Auguste engaged in relentless naval duels. The French ships Fougueux and Boulonnais were sunk, costing hundreds of French sailors their lives. The destruction was unnecessary, but a direct consequence of the Vichy command's order to fight to the last. This is where the line between combat and personal tragedy became stark. Private Robert A.U.S., soldier who landed at Safi, later recounted his sickening feeling upon seeing the first French soldier he shot down. He didn't look like an enemy. He looked like the baker back home, just wearing a different uniform. Confusion and terror were rampant. American troops were often mistaken for Germans by the French due to similar helmet shapes and uniforms, a horrifying twist of fate. Meanwhile, many lower-level Vichy French officers, despite disliking the Germans, felt insulted by the unannounced American landing. They fought not for Hitler, but for a wounded sense of national pride. A French captain captured at Oran reportedly told his American counterpart, "We resisted you, but had you been the Germans, we would have fought to the last man. Now I just hope you know what you are doing." The fighting in Morocco lasted 3 grueling days, causing hundreds of casualties on both sides. In the Casablanca area alone, the US lost nearly 100 killed and over 300 wounded. French casualties were higher, with hundreds killed, including civilians and sailors on the sunk ships. The deadlock was only broken by political intervention. In Algiers, thanks to better preparation and free French support, the fighting stopped faster. Ultimately, General Eisenhower secured a controversial ceasefire deal with Admiral François Darlan, the highest-ranking Vichy military authority in North Africa. The armistice reached on November 10, 1942, was a strategic victory for the Allies, but a moral and political nightmare. Admiral Darlan, a figure notorious for his open collaboration with Nazi Germany, was recognized by the Allies as the de facto military leader of French North Africa in exchange for the Vichy forces laying down their arms and switching sides. This decision, known as the Darlan deal, sparked a furious outcry among Allied public opinion and politicians. How could one claim to fight fascism while endorsing a leader who had so closely collaborated with Germany? The moral grey zone of Operation Torch is best embodied by the Darlan deal. For Eisenhower and Roosevelt, it was a practical choice to end the bloodshed and secure the strategic objective: stabilize North Africa quickly to move on to Tunisia and Italy. The argument was that the goal was not to reshape French politics, but to win the war. Darlan's rapid assassination, a month later, tragically solved the political problem, but it didn't erase the memory of the deal itself. The switch of the Vichy forces happened quickly after the Darlan deal, but the initial days of fighting left deep scars. American and French soldiers who had been shooting at each other days before were now asked to share the same trenches and fight the Germans who, reacting to the landing, promptly occupied the rest of France and moved into Tunisia. The human perspective after the ceasefire was one of bewilderment. French soldiers loyal to Vichy one day were now asked to fight for free France against men they had considered their former allies, the Germans and Italians. Many colonial troops, especially the Senegalese and Moroccan soldiers in the French army, simply followed their officers' orders without truly understanding the political nuances between Paris Vichy and London. They were the trapped military pawns of a European political conflict. Operation Torch ultimately achieved its strategic goal, clearing the way for the Tunisia campaign and eliminating the Axis from Africa in 1943. However, it revealed the raw truth about the war. Loyalty is a fluid concept under pressure, and the cost of strategic pragmatism is sometimes a temporary moral sacrifice. The repercussions of Operation Torch were massive. It didn't just open a new front, it reshaped the relationship between the French factions. It significantly undermined Vichy's prestige and bolstered the position of Charles de Gaulle, even though de Gaulle himself publicly denounced the Darlan deal as a betrayal of French ideals. Conclusion: Operation Torch is a complex chapter of history where the American military fought the French over political divisions rather than military animosity. It was an unnecessary clash driven by the rigid obedience of the Vichy regime and the cold practical calculation of the Allies. The bloodshed at Casablanca reminds us that in war the enemy is not always clearly defined, and the life and death decisions of commanders can turn potential friends into temporary foes. Can a strategic victory ever truly excuse political blunders and the deaths of soldiers who didn't need to die? And has history been fair to the soldiers who chose to fight simply because they were bound by their oath? Follow the channel to keep uncovering the hidden files of history.